Anytime you see a protest today that's heavily pushed in the media, heavily politicized, it almost always comes out right afterwards how utterly provocateur it was.
Are you getting paid right now?
Yeah, we all getting paid for this. Yeah.
How much are you guys getting paid?
It's like $60 per head. I mean, basically, we are all the people who are like out of work right now, who on the bench, haven't been out of work for about a year, too, something like that. So, yeah.
They just found you guys?
Nah, it's a list. It's a list.
How it was paid for by billionaires like George Soros.
A city council meeting, candidates' town hall, protests. These political events rely on public input, but what if those concerned citizens were not for the cause, but were there for cash?
I'm just a concerned citizen coming up here and speaking to you.
But he's not. He's a self-described struggling actor from Beverly Hills who goes by the name of Prince Jordan Tyson. And he now believes he was involved in a secretive new industry where actors are hired to try and sway public officials.
You give the grant, guess who's responsible?
Some of those lines, he says, were scripted by this guy. Recent UCLA graduate Adam Sport and his business Crowds on Demand, which will stage rallies and demonstrations for almost any candidate or cause.
And it just happens again and again and again. And right now we're coming up on the 50-year anniversary of the Detroit riots, which are considered some of the worst riots that has happened in modern American history. And while the media is busy telling everyone that race relations are just as horrible today as they were back then, they're going to leave out a huge part of the story. If you look back at what was actually going on during these horrible riots, it turns out they look just as provocateur and agitated as the ones we're seeing today. So this is back in '66, which is the summer before the Detroit riots, because they had riots during the summers. National Guard was getting called out in '66. This is July '66, and they were given shoot-to-kill orders in some cities, like in Chicago. It was that bad. And there was a huge riot in Cleveland also, where they had to call out the Guard. And towards the end of that month, after all these riots happened, you had a Democratic senator come out from Ohio and say, all of these riots are actually part of a national conspiracy that's being executed by experts. He didn't mince words on that. He straight up called it a conspiracy. It was only a couple days later that one of the riots was charged to white supremacists. Keep in mind, this is before COINTELPRO supposedly officially started, which would have been in August of '67. But it looks really familiar, doesn't it? 3 days after the senator came out and charged a methodical national conspiracy to start these riots, the Attorney General went on television, which was a really big deal back then because there were only 3 channels, and anyone who goes on television, that's like a word on high to the American people, right? He went on television and he said, there's no organized single conspiracy, there's no masterminding plot, there's no evidence of any of that, there's nothing to see here, everyone go back to sleep. But a lot of people didn't believe him, and a week later the House added a special clause into the Civil Rights Bill that would make it a federal crime to cross state lines and take part in or start a riot. Because that's what was happening. People, the same kind of thing you see today was happening back then. Not even a week after that, a grand jury came out and said the Cleveland riots were actually a conspiracy involving communists and professional agitators. At the same time that that was going on, the representative from Ohio's 20th district came out and called for a congressional investigation into the riots because they believed they were professionally agitated. By the time you get to Detroit the next year, and this is a timeline of the Detroit riots in '67 from the Detroit Free Press, all you have to do is read the first 2 events on the timeline and it sounds provocateur. So on July 23rd, you have this place called the Blind Pig, but it was also the United Community League for Civic Action, and it was under surveillance. And at 3:35 a.m., you had an undercover police officer slip into there, and 30 minutes later, they just started rounding people up in there, 85 people, and loaded them into patrol wagons. Keep in mind, this is at a very heated moment politically for the country. It's in a predominantly black neighborhood. Does it not sound provocateur to you? So they just went into this place, the United Community League for Civic Action, and started rounding people up. Well, that pissed a lot of people off, and that's what started the riots. It wouldn't come out until several years later that the CIA was actually not only giving intelligence training and riot gear and training and surveillance and counter-sabotage to local police departments in all of these areas where these things were going on. But it also came out that Army intelligence units were politically spying on American citizens during that time. This article right here is from 1970, and it says, a mounting controversy has been touched off by the charges that Army intelligence units undertook political surveillance of several hundred Illinois residents, including political leaders as Senator Stevenson and ex-Governor Kerner. And that's just in Illinois, and that's just what came out. Who knows what all was actually going on, but Army intelligence units were spying on American citizens. And then by the mid-70s, when all the church committee stuff was coming out, then it started to roll out, oh, by the way, the FBI had infiltrated all of these protest groups. The CIA admitted they infiltrated all the anti-war groups, all the civil rights groups. I mean, all the way up to the feminists and even church groups. Knowing that, when you then go back and look at things like, oh, I don't know, the fact that President Johnson put together a Riot Commission because of the charges of a national conspiracy. In 1967, he formed a Riot Commission, and he put an ex-CIA agent. It's a total joke. Obviously, it's Johnson, so it's a total joke anyway, but that's not the point. Also, I found it kind of interesting that when I was looking at these documents, I found this sanitized copy, declassified in part, of this news article in the CIA's files. There's something whited out up here, and there may have been other pages, but they didn't include them. But it specifically has to do with the Cleveland riot, and it talks about how there were undercover policemen as members of the Communist Party and other affiliated organizations in Cleveland, and they claimed they didn't know anything about any riots or anything like that, but they were definitely there. And they said, we didn't know anything about anything, we have no comment, and all of our information's classified. The point is, why would the CIA have a sanitized copy of this particular article, not approved for release until 2013, having to do with undercover police infiltrating groups in Cleveland at the same time that a riot had just occurred that a grand jury found was provocateured by professional agitators, all the way back in '66. So that's been the protocol since the 1960s, and that's the same protocol you see today. Propaganda and infiltration and paid agitation, and it's all the same stuff. As long as we're not coming together, united, to stand against the corruption that has taken over this country, it doesn't matter what president they put in, it's the system itself. It's a well-oiled machine. What has really changed again? Are we still in the never-ending wars? Yes, of course we are. Do we still have a burgeoning police state that now has a huge advocate in the White House, even bigger than Obama was? It doesn't matter, though, because it's the same agenda going back to the Bushes and the Clintons and even past that. It's the same agenda, and it just continues. It doesn't matter who the president is. And I wish people would get that, at least get that much. They may have a few token things that you like, but ultimately the same agenda always continues. We're still at war. We still have a burgeoning police state. Economically, what has really changed? Not a whole lot. The can will just continue to get kicked down the road, and the problems will just continue to get blamed on the previous administration, because the agenda itself will not change. But as long as they can keep pushing our buttons and keeping us fighting amongst ourselves, then they can ensure that any legitimate protests and the real problems that we all face together, regardless of race, religion, sexual identity, all the stuff they're trying to get us to fight about right now, will be quashed, and that the corrupt status quo will continue.